In today's video, I'm going to show you 3 quick and simple techniques you can use on your models to create realistic rust finishes. G'day guys, I'm Clayton and this is Workbench Hobbies. Hey folks, welcome back, and to my new viewers, a warm welcome to you also. It could be argued that rust effects are one of the more interesting techniques we can apply to our models, and yet it is so simple to achieve realistic results fast. The key to achieving a measured and predictable result with your rust effects, or anything for that matter, is practice. I have a number of paint mules I use to trial new techniques, and today I'll be using the turret from an old Tamiya Sherman. As with most anything to do with the painting phase of a model, a solid foundation to start from is paramount. Here I've primed with Mr. Surfacer 1500 black, although the colour is unimportant. The primer will allow the subsequent layers of paint to bind to the surface and make sure the paint doesn't chip off the plastic once we start working on it. Be mindful, there are many different techniques that can be used to create rust effects, but these are just a few. The first technique is achieved using hairspray chipping. Hairspray chipping is such a versatile technique and it can be used for so many different things. It's one of the most handy skills to develop. The model is painted up in rusty tones, with the first layer being applied being red-brown. I'm using an acrylic lacquer for this stage, 1 because it's going to dry quickly, and 2 the lacquer properties in the paint will make it strong once it does dry. You can use whatever paint you like at this stage, however true acrylics generally won't be as robust and will take longer to dry. Certainly not impossible though. Yellow is mixed into the red-brown to start achieving lighter tones in the rusty colour. I'm focusing on the upper edges and horizontal surfaces, however I'm trying to keep the application random in nature. Vertical strokes are also sprayed using these lightened colours to add a visual gravity to the colour. I'm applying a makeshift mask for the sake of this tutorial, so this is completely unnecessary on your own models. It's also worth noting I always change my airbrush when moving from a lacquer paint to an acrylic. It helps with contamination and the acrylics can be cleaned up with water, whereas the lacquers would require some sort of a heavier solvent. After 10 minutes or so, the section is treated to a coat of chipping fluid and left to dry for 5 minutes. Another 2 layers of the chipping fluid were applied after this point, 3 layers in total. Whilst I've used hairspray from a can for many years, I actually find this dedicated chipping fluid to be a little more predictable, so I've moved over to using this for now. Now for the top coat, and obviously this colour will be dependent on the subject you are painting, but for today I'm going to use a light grey as it should contrast the rust colour for the sake of this tutorial. Different colours show rust effects better than others, so experimenting with different depths for the base rust colours is always a good idea prior to committing to painting your model. The light grey is sprayed over the part and I'm careful not to flood the piece, but to build the coverage up in light, even layers. Also worth noting, I'm using the Tamiya acrylic lacquer again, however this time, rather than using a lacquer thinner, I'm thinning the paint with isopropyl alcohol, or IPA. Thinning with the IPA will allow me a greater window of time to chip the paint, whereas if I had have thinned it with a lacquer-based thinner, it can tend to speed up the drying and make the paint harder to chip. I've created some lighter tones using white to lighten the grey, however this was probably unnecessary. As soon as the paintwork is applied, the surface is moistened with water using a flat brush. Then it's just a matter of scrubbing the surface with the brush, and in a short amount of time you will start to see the paint flaking off the surface, exposing the rusty tones underneath. Different brushes will give you different results, as well as scrubbing in different directions and using different dabbing techniques. Interesting effects can also be achieved using a toothpick or an old airbrush needle. Creating horizontal effects simulates implied movement and gives the vehicle some sort of history. At the risk of overcomplicating the technique, using a true acrylic paint like a Vallejo, an Ammo or an AK Gen 3, to name a few, would make the chipping a lot easier as the paint isn't as strong as the acrylic lacquer. However, I find that sometimes it can chip away too easily, and that is why I use the Tamiya paints for this process. In saying that, the true acrylic paints will give you a greater window to work within, so you could probably be chipping that 24 hours after, whereas the acrylic lacquer you would want to be working on straight away. The next technique is created using masking fluid, and I'm going to take a small step back in time here. Prior to applying the grey top coat, I treated the right hand side of the turret using this masking fluid. Now, the masking fluid is a latex based liquid that dries quickly and can be removed easily from your model. I'm using a VMS product, however there are many other brands available that do more or less the same thing. A small amount of liquid is squeezed from the bottle and is ready for application. An old piece of sponge is then dipped into it, and using a paper towel, the bulk of the masking fluid is removed from the sponge. I want a minimal amount of fluid on the sponge. This is going to be a matter of trial and error until you get the feel for how the technique is working. The sponge is then used to apply the masking fluid where I want the rust chips to be. By changing pressure and the angles of the application, I'm able to achieve some variation in the distribution of the product. I'm looking to get a mix of large and small dots around logical areas of wear to the subject. The liquid is hard to see properly, however, it dries very quickly and the differences in the gloss levels tend to give you a reasonable idea of the application. Once it's dry, which isn't very long at all, the grey top coat is applied. Once dry, it's a matter of removing the masking fluid and revealing the chipping colour. The easiest way I've found to do this is by using a small piece of blue tack and running it across the surface of the model. The blue tack grabs the blobs and removes the top layer of paint in the process. All types of paint will perform well using this technique, and again, it's another simple technique anyone can achieve impressive results using. The last technique is the tried and true sponge chipping. The sponge chipping is applied much the same way I applied the masking fluid, only this time I'm using the rust coloured paint and applying that using the sponge. The first layer of chipping is applied using a light rust colour from Vallejo, and dabbing the sponge in an up and down motion and starting lightly at first will give you an indication of how much paint is transferring from the sponge. If there isn't a lot, then try pressing a little harder. This is a technique that should be slowly built up and considered. Light rust colour will represent new rust and darker colours tend to represent older rust. The technique is then finished off by dabbing a black-brown colour by Vallejo and working in a smaller area. This is a quick and simple technique that can produce results fast. Whilst the chipping looks great at this point, we are just a whisker away from making it look epic, and we can do this by using oil paint. A small amount of burnt sienna and burnt umber is applied around the model in the areas that could use a little more attention. For the side sections of the model, I want the rust to be streaking in a downward motion. By using a brush lightly moistened with the white spirit and dragging the paint in a downward motion, I'm able to feather and blend the streak, and it just adds an extra level of depth to the effect. For some of the smaller spots, the oil paint is just blended around the area to represent staining and tie the effects together. Now, I feel I could have gone a little darker with the base rust colour, especially for the areas where a lot of the top coat was removed. So by making darker tones with the burnt umber oil paint, I'm able to just reintroduce a bit of depth to those colours. So there it is, 3 simple techniques you can use on your own models to create a rusty effect. Agreed, the oil paint could be regarded as a 4th technique, but it's really just a tool to enhance the foundations of the other techniques. So perhaps I should have named this video 3.5 tricks to create a rusted finish.
You did.
Of course, there are many other techniques we can use to create rusty looks. Painting them, using salt chipping, speckling, and heck, I've even seen people using Vegemite to apply chips. But perhaps I can go into that another day. I'm happy to explore some of these techniques if you'd like, just let me know in the comments below. I'm looking to do a series of videos around providing answers to questions you might have in the hope that it will help others with similar issues. Feel free to reach out in the comments or through Facebook or my website if you have a modelling question, and I'll do my best to feature it in an upcoming video. I have a lot on the bench at the time this video was posted, so be sure to check in from time to time. I will revisit the vignette for the Nashorn, however it's taking a little longer than I'd hoped. Plus, I've already commenced construction for the next model for a complete build series, although it is fighting me all the way at this point. Thank you again for allowing me on your screens. If I've added some value, please hit the like button and subscribe. And remember, this is the greatest hobby in the world and we are all in this together. Share it with your friends and connect with your community. It's so important. I look forward to seeing you again in a couple of weeks. See you soon.